Welcome, everybody. We're so excited to have you participating with us at Roots Tech Connect 2021 in the story track. And we are talking story all the time because story is such an important part of family history. And today we are going to discuss with Brittany and Angie. We're going to talk about story and kids because they view things differently and they may need some different types of story to help them connect. And we're going to focus strictly on kids and storytelling. So let's have intros, and we'll start with you, Brittany, and tell us what you do and maybe like a favorite storyteller.
Ooh, that's a fun one. I like that. So I'm Brittany Beattie. I run familyfed.com, a website that provides ideas for families to be able to create. And also I love that story side of it, to record experiences with their family. So it's all about making and recording those memories. So, and I think just building imagination, fostering connection is the biggest thing for me. So anything that fosters connection between family, that's what I love to do. So that's what familyfed.com is. And probably a favorite children's storyteller, I would have to say classic Dr. Seuss. And I think it's so great because he uses an unconventional way of telling a story, but that rhyming effect, I think, really stays with people so long. So I love that it's a creative way to approach a story for children. Something as simple as a rhyme can make a huge difference. So it doesn't have to be those big things. It's those little ways that we are able to foster stories and memory around them that I think are so important.
Yes. Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. And what a good shout out, Dr. Seuss, because I think we're all very, very much familiar with his storytelling. Okay, Angie, tell us about you and maybe a favorite children's storyteller as well.
Hi, yeah, I'm Angie Lucas. I'm a children's author. My first book came out last year. It is called My Big Dumb Invisible Dragon. And I've written dozens of others, still trying to get those published, which is kind of a process. And I'm a professional writer and editor and a passionate journaler. So that's my background, and I'm an avid reader. And I would say one of my favorite children's storytellers is Kate DiCamillo. So she's written The Tale of Despereaux and The Miraculous Journey of Edward Tulane. And I think there's one called The Magician's Elephant. She's just magical. She really taps into, I think, themes that children relate to really well. And there's always just a sense of magic and wonder in her writing. She writes middle grade novels that I'm sure you've heard of. There's Because of Winn-Dixie, that's another one. So there's there's a handful. She's just magical.
Okay, and I think today we're going to talk about magical and rhyming and things like that, perhaps. But really, how can you, people that have kids or that interact with kids, how can you involve them in storytelling? Because we know from research that storytelling and families that tell stories, there's more resiliency, there's a deeper sense of self and identity, and it also can be fun. Telling stories with family can be a really fun thing to do. So I think let's start this off. Why are stories? How can stories create connections with kids? Why are they so connective? Angie, do you want to take that one?
Sure. So I would say that with children are they're not very abstract in their thinking. So the best way to get a concept through to a child is through a story. And we know this from, that's what is passed down through oral traditions. Every religion passes values down through story, through scripture. It's not through just like definitions and, facts. It comes through parables, it comes through stories. And if you think about what's the best way to teach a child the importance of telling the truth and having your word trusted, well, it's The Boy Who Cried Wolf, right? That's just a shorthand. You tell that story. Every child knows that story, and probably in Western culture. And that is a way of explaining consequence and the importance of that value in a way that they can understand, that they can assimilate, because they can't think just in abstract values yet. That's how they learn abstract values, is through the repetition of stories. And I think another reason is because children are just very self-centered. We all are. We can't really think outside our own experience. And so I think story helps children to realize that they are not the first person who has felt this thing. They're not the first person who has experienced this thing. And that's a big piece of the connection part. It helps pull them outside of their own narrow world and into understanding that, you know, that there are others who have gone through similar things.
Oh, wow. Okay. I love that. I love that. I appreciate and I think adults, it helps us understand things that can be sometimes kind of abstract, and it gives us insight into other people's experiences and makes us feel less alone. Brittany, what about you? What do you think about stories and connections in kids?
Yeah, I think maybe building off of what Angie was saying with that too, where we realize others have gone through this, we're able to build that empathy, build that connection, and then the resilience that comes with it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we know, okay, if they made it through this, so can I. Or if they experienced this, here's how I can get through it. And I think stories really present an opportunity for modeling. When we share stories, are we sharing different emotions that teaches them it's okay to share different emotions?
Mm-hmm.
Are we teaching them processes and problem solving so that when they have an experience, we say, yeah, I had this experience and here's what I learned from it. Here's how I grew from it. So we can model processing for them through stories. And I think we also can help really shape their understanding of the world. So if I tell a story and end on the end result that, oh, here's this negative thing that happened, it's going to teach them something about, am I shaping my world in a negative way? Or am I going to help shape the world and say, well, what did you learn from it? How was that a great thing? We can help them start to see their stories, their personal stories, in a very positive way, in a growth-oriented way. You know, we think of growth mindset, right? Are we using stories to model how they can view their world? So I just think there's so many great benefits from it.
Wow. Okay. Yes. It's a healthy practice. It's a healthy practice. It's something that connects us, but it also helps kids sort of navigate the world. And like Angie mentioned, feel less alone. And Brittany mentioned you can model sort of things that would be helpful to them and outlooks. And I love the growth mindset idea. So, okay. Now, I know there are things we shouldn't do when trying to connect with kids through story. And it might be things like, talk too long or include mundane details, right? So what are things we should do when communicating through using story to communicate with kids? Or how can we be effective when it comes to story and kids? Brittany, I'll go to you first on that one.
Yeah, so I think it can just put yourself in their shoes and try and view it as, how is this going to be just a really great building opportunity? So keep the adventure part of it in, keep the fun part. If you can tell a great story, if appropriate, and laugh and narrate it in a fun way so that it really builds this excitement and this adventure. And then maybe to just tack on the very end, that little, what are we learning from this? And that part, keep it really short, because if it does feel like a lecture, then every story in the future, they're gonna be like, oh, mom's telling me this because of, here's what's coming. But if it's just incorporating maybe that through it. But I think build it as a fun opportunity, again, where appropriate, and even some hard conversations that we need to have, because those stories are really important too, that we can just think about what is their current understanding and how can we fit this in a way that's really concrete in their world. Like Angie said, that concrete versus abstract, depending on their age, is in there. So I think if we just take that little second up front and put ourselves in their shoes and say, what would make this a fun or a great learning experience for me? And then use that.
And I want to mention, thank you so much, Brittany. Brittany also has a class that's in the Getting Started story track, and it's ideas for kids to tell their own story. And it's important to think about senses and the different parts of their world and their life. It's not just verbal or just written, right? It's all of these additional ways. So I appreciate that. Okay, Angie, your turn.
I would say don't underestimate your kids, what they're capable of understanding, what they're capable of hearing and dealing with, because I think kids are better at translating stories than we think. So when I was writing my book, it's a grief allegory, and I initially wanted to keep it very vague, like nobody knew what happened when this big dumb invisible dragon kind of swooped in. And one thing I learned from working with my editor and others in the publishing world is that I needed to make it more concrete. I didn't want to say who had died. I wanted it to just be open, but I learned through that the importance of just telling a very concrete story and letting the child assimilate that and layer their own experience on it. So sometimes we think we have to just spell it out really, really directly, but kids are good at translating. And I mean, and I'm not saying this in a negative way, but we just are very self-centered as kids. We put ourselves in the center of everything when we're a kid. So they're really good at doing that. And a quote that I just pulled up that I wanted to make sure and share is from G.K. Chesterton. And he says, fairy tales do not give the child his first idea of bogey or monsters. What fairy tales give the child is his first clear idea of the possible defeat of monsters. The baby has known the dragon intimately ever since he had an imagination. What the fairy tale provides for him is a St. George to kill the dragon. So that's kind of pulling in this idea of this medieval story about St. George who killed this dragon to save the princess. It's, an age-old story from, Middle Ages on forward. And the idea that sometimes we feel like we can't, so kids, ever since they've had an imagination, they have fears. They've seen the things in the world. The dark is scary, all those things. But what story does is, give them the St. George, the victory over the dragon. That's what the story does. So, and sometimes we shy away from like, and obviously there's an age when certain things are too scary and not age appropriate. But I think not underestimating that our kids can handle some complex things, especially when you tell them through story, because they'll only pick out the parts they're ready to understand.
Okay.
Can I add one thing on that, Wendy?
Absolutely.
With that idea of not underestimating them, because I totally agree with you, Angie. I think that's like, they're brilliant and they're amazing. So I think too, as you tell the story, have them play a part in it. So act it out and then say, okay, this just happened. What would you do if you were this person? And I think that they'll surprise us so often that they can think through that answer and you can say, yeah, they, so similar in this way, or that's a great example. And here's, something similar that this person did. So have them help you tell the story. And it's a great way for them to get in it, to process that. And they will, like Angie said, surprise us with how well they can anticipate things. And I love that they can learn and feel in a different way, that they can conquer those dragons. That's a good example, Angie.
And I think something too, so we're talking about effective, but I think it's also, helping them explore emotions and understand these complex things that, it's even challenging for us adults, right? And I think, maybe things to avoid are like Brittany talked about lecturing, or Angie talked about like oversimplifying or thinking that they can't handle it, being age appropriate, of course. But I also think things like too many details or making it about yourself, make sure that it's engaging. And when go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, like in children's publishing right now, and I think trends come and go, but if you think back to children's books ages ago, there was a lot of moralizing, and they would put the moral right in your face right at the end. If you read books that have been published in the last several decades, that doesn't happen anymore. Very rarely will you see overt moralizing where you just say, and that's why you should look both ways before crossing the street or whatever. It's not spelled out anymore. But it used to be, if you think back to years ago, cautionary tales for children and things like that. I think that we trust children more to be able to grasp these concepts than we used to in the past. So you'll notice it when you read books to your children or grandchildren. That's just not there anymore. So I think it opens the door, like Brittany was saying, to conversations where you can have that conversation with them, engage how well they're relating to the story and what they are pulling from it.
Oh, fantastic. And if we dive into sort of this idea of family stories and, family history, and these could be things that are passed down orally or that are discovered, from journals or documents or records, or it could be experiences. What makes a family story, and perhaps we can also include children's story, memorable? Like, help us be successful in using stories to connect with kids. Give us the secrets. What makes it memorable? Brittany, do you want to take that one first?
Yeah, so I think putting yourself at their age. So if you have a story as an adult, as a worker, that story is probably not going to relate to them as much as, here's what happened when I was a kid. In both situations, you're going to have people interaction, but if you want to teach people interaction, teach it from your childhood and start with those stories that they can relate to. Or, if you have a hobby, but that they have this hobby, find a story in something that they're passionate about and tell them a story in that genre, because they're going to be so much more interested if you start with the things that they know and the things that they love.
Oh, I love that. Make it relevant to them and their experience. Go with them instead of try to bring them to you. Okay, Angie, what thoughts do you have about that?
So I asked my daughter before I record this, she's 10. I said, so what, I wanted to see how good I've been at, maybe telling some of these family stories.
Uh-huh.
And I mean, I think I kind of put her on the spot, but I just said, what are some of the stories from my childhood that you remember? And she said, that one time you wet your pants on the way home from school in kindergarten, which of course, like, that's the one that she crossed onto. But I think it's because it was something that I think I told that to her at a time when maybe something kind of similar had happened to her. So it was me being able to relate to her, like, I know what this is like. So that's the story from, being kindergarten or first grade, having that little accident on the way home walking from school is the thing that she latched onto, that she told me is this memorable story. But I think that what that tells us is that, like Brittany was saying, putting ourselves in the concerns of that age. They love to see pictures of you at their same age, or of grandma or grandpa at that same age, or just understanding, the things that they're going through right now have been experienced by 10-year-olds throughout history, right? So anyway, I don't know that I've been as good as I want to be. I'm really good at sharing fiction with my children, as far as telling the family stories, this has been a real boost for me to remember to tell more actual stories. Like, we talk about our Viking heritage all the time. That's something my husband's really proud of. So she's always saying, even when she was little, no, I'm a Viking, so I don't need a coat because I'm used to the cold and I have Viking blood from, our Norwegian ancestry. So there's little things like that we pull through, but it did make me realize I want to do a better job of telling the actual family stories that I hold dear.
Well, and I think that's what we're here for at Roots Tech. And that's what the content is that you can find in the Getting Started track, Brittany's class. Angie talks a lot about journaling in hers. And so the conversation that we think of in stories and kids, which is our topic for today, I think it's also relevant to using stories to relate to other people. And as you were both talking, I was remembering I moved a couple of years ago, and I have stuff in storage at my parents' house, and my kids wanted to see some of my old yearbooks. And so I pulled up this folder, like a peachy folder, which you guys are too young to remember, but it's like an old school folder. And it had my handwriting in there. And I was in probably junior high or high school. And it was talking about wanting to be a mother. And somehow I had saved this. And so in this basement of my parents' house, surrounded by plastic containers full of their baby blankets and scrapbooks and all these other things, I found this sort of doorway into who I was. And I read it to them. And it was so moving because the things that I had wanted to do actually came to fruition. And they were so moved by young Wendy, that voice, and seeing that artifact of what I was actually, as I was reading it. And so it's interesting how going back to who we are at the similar age can really be connective, and making things that are memorable. Like, my kids love to hear stories of when I've had funny or embarrassing things happen to me. So and
embarrassing stories are a great way to connect, for sure.
Yes. And think about movies and storylines and the types of things that you respond to, and you can kind of use that as a lens through how to engage with your kids and stories and the kids that you are in your life. Okay, so last question, and thank you so much for being here, and thanks to everybody who's participating. And it's just such an exciting time, Roots Tech 2021, to be together, gathered from all over the world. How can we encourage kids to document their own stories? Brittany, what do you think about that?
So I think children naturally are storytellers. If you try to keep, if you have a group of kids and you try to keep them quiet to learn something, what are they going to want to do? They're instantly going to want to start talking, right? They have stories they want to share. I think the important thing is, one, let them tell the stories that they want to tell. So just, sit down and give them a voice and they'll want to do it. But I think too, come up with creative ways to do it. If you tell young children, and especially if they've been in school all day, then, sit down and write a story. They're probably not going to be super interested in that. But if you say, hey, let's go take some photos of your favorite things, or, let's act out something that you remember, or involve them in that connection. Say, your brother is having a hard time with this. Do you have a story that you've been through that would help them? with that. So I think just making it fun, having a purpose, and trying creative options. Like, as you mentioned earlier, we have that class on that with those 10 ideas that are really fun ways. So let them tell the stories that they want to share, and make it fun, and let them tell them however they want to do it. There is no one right way to tell a story. If you're telling a story, that's the right way. And I think not diminishing what stories are worth recording and what ones aren't, because what's worth recording for them is maybe different from what we would do, but that is exactly who they are at that point. And I love that not only does how they tell the story, but what stories they choose is a great picture of them at any age. So I have to say, let them use what they already want to do.
Yes, and let them tell the stories they want to tell. I love that. I love that so much. Angie, what would you say to that?
I love those ideas. I think that was fantastic. And I also think I like the idea of just kind of curating all the things they're already doing. So homework assignments, kids are often asked to write about their lives. I keep all those little, journal kind of things that my daughter is assigned to do in school. And they're allowed to either write fiction or something from their life. They're supposed to, in third grade, she had to write every Monday about her weekend, and it could either be true or made up. And so I have this little collection of those. I think collect and keep those. Those are really fun. And I've also, I think it's important to, when they're little, save stories for them. So I have various ways I do that. I've written them letters, and I have a book of letters I've written to each of my kids, like from age 2 to 3. I filled out a calendar from age 0 to 1 of daily little tiny tidbits and memories. And now we're at this stage with that, after the calendar and the letters, and then just a notes file where I write down the funny things they say, the funny way that they pronounce things. With my daughter, who's now 10, I've started a back and forth journal where I write a little entry and then ask her a question, and then she writes an entry back, and it's fun to get different insights into what she's thinking. And I just will leave it on her bed. We got a special unicorn one, and we picked it out together, and then she'll write in it and then leave it back on my bed. And we're just starting that right now. But I think curating, pulling in all the things they're already doing, and B, just looking for little ways to involve them in thinking about and writing about things. And I think setting the example of the little calendar, she likes looking at that calendar. She likes looking at these letters that I wrote to her when she was littler. And I think that builds a tradition that she can now build on. And eventually it's going to be her job to tell her story. When they're too young to do it, you do it for them. But I'm right now in the transition period with my daughter.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. I love those ideas. Take what they're already doing that documents their life and curate that, but then find opportunities to get their voice. And it can be, like you mentioned, a back and forth journal, or it can be her seeing what you've done and then kind of telling stories, even just sharing stories at the end of the day. And wow. Okay, this has been fantastic. Brittany and Angie, I so appreciate you joining us here for Roots Tech to talk about stories and kids, and appreciate your expertise. Brittany, tell us where we can find you and all your fantastic ideas.
Yeah, so familyfed.com, and the Fed stands for Fun Every Day. So if that's an easier way to remember it, familyfed.com. And then also on Instagram, I post a lot on there, which is @familyfed. So both of those, I have a YouTube channel, and those are both linked, or that's linked for my website. So everything there, we just love bringing ideas and making it fun. So,
and they're so fun, and your class is fantastic. So everyone, you need to check it out. Angie, where can we stay in touch with you?
So I have a website too. It's angielucas.com, and you can find my book there. It's also available at Amazon or Barnes & Noble or IndieBound or your favorite local retailer. It's My Big Dumb Invisible Dragon.
Oh yes, show us.
I do have a stuffed one that I had made of my little dragon. His name is Sorg. My illustrator for my book is from, she is Swedish. So she's from Sweden. And her husband's Norwegian, like my husband has Norwegian ancestry. So anyway, we named him Sorg, which sounds dragony, but it's also the Scandinavian word for, in many languages, Scandinavian languages, the word for grief. And he does represent, grief in the story. Mm-hmm. But yeah, angielucas.com. And I also have a class in the story track, which is called Why Journaling Matters. It's called Write Away, WRITE, Why Journaling Matters. So there's, hopefully watch that that class or that presentation, and you will be convinced that you absolutely do have stories to tell, and it's important that you do it.
Yes, we believe it. All right. Thank you so much. And if you have comments or questions, people are moderating the chat, so make sure you leave them in there. And thanks, Angie and Brittany.